Verse 34. Harsh words disturb the minds of others and cause deterioration in a bodhisattva's conduct. Therefore, give up harsh words, which are unpleasant to others. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. Sitting with what your immediate response is. Seeing if you can move your mind into bodhicitta at whatever level feels genuine and connected. So these recent few verses are similar to when we talk about the 8 worldly concerns, except for the direction is different. So when we talk about the 8 worldly concerns, we're talking about how to manage getting what we don't want and getting what we don't want. When we're looking at the 8 worldly concerns, it's kind of like when the trouble is happening to you, how do you transform it? Remember when you looked at, looking at craving for comfort, avoiding discomfort, looking for seeking acquisition, being afraid of loss, not wanting criticism, wanting to be praised, wanting a good reputation, not wanting a bad reputation. That tug of war of attachment and aversion is really how we look at the 8 worldly concerns, how to manage our own responses. In these verses, it's much more when you are the enactor of the harm, not so much the one who's receiving the harm or receiving the deprivation. This is about looking at you as an instrument of pain and how to stop it and why to stop it and to acknowledge your own responsibility in the harm that you do to others. So there's similar topics and there's similar ways of reframing, but when you're on the bodhisattva path, you're not just trying to self-soothe. You're not just trying to manage life and reframe life and transform life and bring compassion to life. You're actually trying to actively bring benefit and really actively make sure you're not causing harm. So it's just a shift, the same basic content, but from a different direction. So this one, when it says, harsh words disturb the minds of others, of course, not from their own side. Not inherently, not divorced from context. That is all known, right? We just did the emptiness verses. It's not pretending that things don't exist within a context. It's acknowledging that there is a relative harm that is nevertheless done by us when we speak in a certain way. And the simplest example is that, with some friends, you can be, a bit direct, a bit blunt. You might be able to swear, you might be able to, be a bit coarse, and they're not hurt by that. It doesn't offend them. It's just in the flow of, this is how we talk to each other. And then with a different group of people, that same way of expressing yourself is going to be very offensive and triggering and sound rude, etc., right? And so that even if your motivation is sound, specific content, you do need to adjust your framing depending on your audience. We already know this. So there's the adjusting your framing, depending on who your audience is, and there's the adjusting of your motivation, both. So it's saying here it's not enough to simply adjust your motivation. You know, so much of the spiritual path is just make sure your motivation is good, make sure your motivation is good, make sure your motivation is good. If it works or it doesn't, what can you do? We don't have control over life. Do your best, let go, move on. Here it's saying sometimes we are an instrument of harm, even if not inherently. Even if we're not the only factor in that, sometimes we do use our words as weapons, either intentionally or unintentionally. So harsh words disturb the minds of others. We have to sit with, that is a relative, conventional truth that exists in this world. We can't shy away from our responsibility in that. Sometimes how we speak upsets people, even if we don't mean to, even if they're being overreactive. Do you know what I mean? So it's taking responsibility, but it's not thinking that anything is anyone's fault or that anything is just one condition. And yet, you know, still you're holding this bodhisattva ideal that says, if I can prevent harm, I will prevent harm. Does that make sense? The upgrade. And so, you know, and causes deterioration in a bodhisattva's conduct. You, the aspiring bodhisattva, as well as people who might already be on a bodhisattva path, we can kind of rattle their path. You know, we can be an influence that distracts them from the momentum of their lives, even though, of course, their path is their own responsibility. So this is a very delicate one of, you know, we don't want to get into trying to micromanage things and overplan things and feel like we're somehow the center of the universe, in charge of all help, in charge of all harm. We don't want to do that at all. But this is saying that even if you are a, quote, lesser practitioner and you're speaking to someone who is a, quote, superior practitioner, you can still be a negative influence on them and disrupt their path. So in Dharma centers, it's very common to hear people trying to be careful about this, where, say, for example, someone is, I don't know, working in the Gampa, filling the water bowls, I don't know, getting ready for class, and you come in and you have a logistic that is lower, you know, like, whose job is it to organize the grass getting cut? If you see that someone is doing a superior virtue, you don't interrupt them. Yeah, because they might be interruptible and they'll say, oh, I organized this person to do it, and then are able to continue on with what they were doing. Or you might have broken their focus and their momentum that they had cultivated in that practice, and it's hard to kind of get back into the flow of it. So even though it's that person's responsibility, whether or not interruption was interruption, still you can do your best to kind of assess the situation of, am I bringing something to it or am I taking something from it? Do you know what I mean? So whether you agree or disagree is another step, but if it's clear, yeah.
Can I ask something?
Yeah, please.
In the Hebrew translation, it says it hurts, it damages your own practice of bodhisattva, not somebody else's.
Yeah, it's talking about both. Yeah, and you'll see even more translations and more translations and more translations. So you read the commentary to try and figure out what's being said here, and it's both directions. So of course it harms your own practice to speak harshly, especially intentionally harshly. But here I'm wanting to focus a little bit more on the effect we have on others, because that's something we don't talk about as often. We're really trying to be self-aware, we're trying to cultivate good states of mind, blah, blah, blah. But we don't often look at ourselves as an instrument of harm, you know? And this is not to say that being an instrument of harm means that you're a bad person, or means that you meant to, or means that's all you are. It's not simplistic, you know, don't go there and assume that's the conversation, but it is about taking responsibility. And so, therefore, give up harsh words which are unpleasant to others. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. It would be very easy to become neurotic about this, right? It would be very easy to tiptoe around conflict because you don't want to disturb anyone's mind. And a lot of the problems logistically and organizationally come from a misunderstanding of this kind of verse, because this verse is found in different incarnations all throughout Buddhist literature, of how important it is to be careful of your speech so that you don't disturb other people's minds. And that makes us not especially good at acknowledging conflict when it's in front of us. And when you talk to ethnically Tibetan people, this is a very broad generalization, it's a huge stereotype, but thus far in my experience, talking to Tibetan people about conflict is really hard, because they jump to reframe very quickly. They jump to, here's how I will take it on the path, here's how I will transform it, here's how I will work on myself. When you could just do a very simple logistical adjustment and life would be easier for everyone. You know what I mean? So sometimes our hesitancy to disturb the minds of others makes us fearful of minor conflict that will lead to long-term harmony. So this is important not to misunderstand. It's a delicate line to tread. Yeah, so if we're sitting with it, when are we most likely to be harsh? You know, what affliction drives harshness in our speech? Because it's going to really vary for us individual to individual. You know, when we become a bit more coarse, a little less empathic, maybe reverting back to ways we spoke when we were younger or when we were around coarser people, what is the catalyst for sort of backsliding? You know? Sometimes it's the friends that we're with bring out a certain kind of harshness. Sometimes it's the mental state, sometimes combination. But I think it's interesting to just sit with for a minute. When I am harsh, why and when? And when do I notice that I'm disturbing the minds of others and adjust? And when do I notice and not care? And when do I not notice at all? Right? Because there's different layers of this. So, you know, for some people, they're very kind, very polite professionally, but then as soon as you take them to a supermarket or you take them to a restaurant, then they're very, I don't know, harsh, dismissive, patronizing of service people, you know, people in service positions. They're the person who's always arrogant towards the waitress, or they're the person who asks the doorman to carry their bags and they're like, come on, come on. And they suddenly turn into a monster, but professionally they're lovely, or in their family they're lovely. So it's kind of worth sitting with, all right, do I guard my speech and recognize its power in all contexts or only some? Because I'm guessing professionally you're very careful with your speech. You're really aware of what you're saying when you say it. This is a pivotal moment in someone's developmental process. This is, you know, a moment of truth in their mental health. You're not going to just say things carelessly when you're in a professional setting. And then as soon as you have a break and a cup of tea, the next people you talk to, do you let go of that valuing of your speech, or do you keep it? Does it shift? What happens? It's just something to explore, you know. And what does it do in your mind when your speech gets this way? You know, it's a symptom of something, always, as we know. Yeah, anyway, so this one is relatively straightforward, but I just thought to bring in the shift of, in the 8 worldly concerns, you're much more reframing when things happen to you. And here in this case, you're looking more at when things happen from you. So these last few have been, related to speech and communication. And then 35 is habitual disturbing emotions are hard to stop through counteractions. Armed with antidotes, the guards of mindfulness and mental alertness destroy disturbing emotions like attachment at once, as soon as they arise. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. So then we're going back into the internal and the motivation and the mental. So it's a powerful acknowledgement that Tokme Zangpo is giving us. It's a very powerful empathic sort of expression, habitual, disturbing emotions are hard to stop through counteractions, right? It's hard to stop habits just by applying an antidote. It's hard to stop them. They're just so familiar, it's like breathing. We don't have to stop and think, let's get angry. We don't have to stop and think, let's have craving. But sometimes we do have to stop and think, let's be patient, or stop and think, let's be loving. You know, negative states of mind are so habitual, they're spontaneous. And thinking that you should be otherwise is harsh. Yeah, thinking that you should already be better than this just by wanting to be is an unfair expectation. So habitual disturbing emotions are hard to stop through counteractions or antidotes or anything like this. But when you're armed with mindfulness and mental alertness, it's much easier to catch them before they get momentum. So this is a concept that's repeated again and again, is that if you can catch a negative state of mind when it's just starting to pop its head up into your mind, if you're mindful enough to catch it, it'll dispel. But if you don't catch it, it will grow, take over, and then in a way you have to ride it out, you know, and kind of let it finish its cycle, and then try to catch yourself before the next round starts. So it's saying that, you know, we don't want passive mindfulness, we need active mindfulness that is watching for. Yeah, it's not just watching, it's watching for, have I slipped off my path? Have I maintained my positive motivation? This is the important difference between Mahayana mindfulness and just general mindfulness, is that watching what you're doing while you're doing is very good for your concentration and is very good for your peace of mind and helps keep you steady. And it is not enough to keep you in altruism unless you make an agenda of altruism. Mindfulness in and of itself is not going to carry with it bodhicitta unless you decide to have bodhicitta carried with it. We have to be mindful about any number of things. We have to be mindful about breaches of ethics, so no one will catch us. We have to be mindful about, neutral things. We have to be mindful all the time. Doesn't mean it's necessarily spiritual practice, even if it is leading to heightened concentration. So this is be mindful with, because it's really going to help save the day. If you just notice, I have a little bit of neediness, craving bubbling up, I see that, I recognize it, it dispels, it dissolves. I feel a little annoyance, irritability, blah, 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 creeping up. I see it, I notice it, it dispels and dissolves. If not, then it just takes over the whole mind, colors the whole mind, and there it is. And then all you can do is try to manage your reactions to it and your responses to it, which is important work, but is much more painful and much more suffering than if you could just dispel the disturbing emotion at its root.
There is a certain resemblance with what you said about criticism, when you said, well, what would we talk about? What would be humoristic about? It is also this flavor of not losing your liveliness.
If you weren't annoyed all day, what would you think about? If you weren't full of like snack obsessions, what would you think about? After this, it's going to be cookies. After that, it's going to be carrot sticks. If I don't have that in the back of my mind, what will I think about? Yeah. We're afraid of space, you know, we are. We don't know what to do with the mind not being hyperstimulated. It's really uncomfortable at first. But you know, like we've talked about many times, it's the transition point that's uncomfortable. The release afterwards is incredible, but the transition point is just awful when you're catching yourself and just feeling the discomfort of wanting to stay stimulated, even if it's uncomfortable stimulation, even if it's anxiety, even if it's something awful you want to get rid of, to just be in the center of it and let it dissolve is so uncomfortable. And yet, you know, if you could just do it for 5 minutes, there would be release. It's just, it feels like 5 minutes is forever. Yeah, it's so hard. So if you catch the negative state of mind and you dispel the negative state of mind, then the mind says, what shall I think about? What shall I think about? You don't have to give it anything in particular except to just come back to my motivation is. Motivation is. Or even just allow space. You know, just allow space, allow the calm that comes with the mind's clarity reasserting itself. But be nice to yourself in transition. That's the key here, is be kind to yourself in transition, but it will only be a transition if you can stay with the discomfort of change. If you always are trying to soothe yourself and stimulate yourself with the same old thing, nothing's ever going to get any better. You know? So, you know, maybe you take your kids camping and you say, during this camping trip, we're not looking at our mobile phones at all. And they're like, no, don't take my phone, right? And they're having a whole fit and they have a tantrum. And you take their phones and for the first, I don't know, half an hour, it's awful and you're fighting. And then after half an hour, they're like, oh, a tree, let's climb it, you know, and then they're fine. But the first half an hour is just like pulling teeth. You know, it's awful, the transition point, but afterwards is freedom. And we know this viscerally. We just have to remember this discomfort in transition isn't forever. Do you know what I mean? Is there some parallel that you do in when you're seeing the patterns with a patient that you've had over many years, where, you know, there gets to be a bit of a rumble and a bit of distress and a bit of agitation, or maybe like fighting with the analyst or some sort of reactivity, and you know that that's a sign that in a few weeks there's going to be kind of a breakthrough or something? Is there some sort of parallel that you see? A rumble and then peace, and then a rumble and then peace. Don't leave me hanging, shouting into the void, y'all.
The problem with the Zoom is that you can't joke, because to joke spontaneously, you have to open the mic, so the momentum is passed. So the liveliness of the association that could keep it alive become heavy. So we are thinking and we have what to say, but it's kind of, who would open the mic to say a joke, you know, it's not serious enough. So that's why we are sitting as zombies. It's not that we are not aware of what's going on.
I rely too heavily on humor, obviously. Yeah. Okay. So Heart Sutra, or do you have some stuff to bring to 37 practices? Are you, okay, you're Heart Sutra people. I'm all for it. Yay, Heart Sutra. Okay, page 57 is your Heart Sutra in English. There's some easy bits and there's some kind of tricky bits in the Heart Sutra. And I thought that on Wednesday, we're gonna drill into the two kind of really dense passages, and today we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about some of the weird words and just make sure that we're not thrown by any of the weird words that pop up throughout the passage, and do some more of the easy passages that are familiar to you, just so you don't lose the main points before we get into the more elaborate sections. Yeah, so you feel held by the whole sutra, and then when there's a part that's like, what is that bit? You don't feel completely lost, like you don't have a connection to the whole thing. Okay, so today is a day of weird words and a couple more of the easy passages, and then Wednesday we're going to go into the two more tricky passages. Okay, so starting at the top, the Heart of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. Now look at the Sanskrit underneath. Arya Bhagavati Prajnaparamita Hridaya Sutra. So it's considered to be like a blessing or an acknowledgement of lineage, or kind of building a connection to the unbroken oral tradition to name the languages that came before your own language. So if you go to His Holiness's teachings and it's a formal teaching, not a public talk, they'll do the Heart Sutra in several different languages. And they'll start with the Pali tradition, and some like Thai forest monks or some Sri Lankan Buddhists will do it in Pali. And then if anybody speaks Sanskrit, they'll get somebody to do it in Sanskrit. And then they'll do it in maybe Hindi and Tibetan, and eventually get to English. And then maybe eventually get to Hebrew. But they kind of do it in order of who captured the Heart Sutra at what time, and it goes in a line respecting the lineage. So this is in the language of India, Arya Bhagavati, Prajnaparamita Hridaya Sutra, which does just mean the heart of the perfection of wisdom sutra, but there's a few points in it that actually give a different flavor. So Arya is a word you know. Arya means someone who's achieved the path of seeing, someone who has realized emptiness directly. Bhagavati is related to the word Bhagawan below in the main sutra, where it says, "Thus did I hear at one time, the Bhagawan was dwelling on massive Vulture's mountain." So Bhagavati is the female version, and it means endowed transcendent destroyer. Endowed transcendent destroyer, Bhagawan, or endowed transcendent destroyer, what's a girl, Bhagavati. Okay, and what's said here is that the perfection of Wisdom Sutra could be called the heart of the mother of perfection of Wisdom Sutra, the mother. And when the mother is described in Buddhism, it's not always the sevenfold cause and effect, realizing all sentient beings have been your mother, remembering their kindness. It's not always that. It's not always as simple as that. It can mean, in this context, wisdom is the mother, and wisdom is shared throughout all of the traditions and variations of Buddhism. The wisdom side, the wisdom wing, is common. And what's different is the method side, or the method lineage. The father's side is what's uncommon, right? Because in ancient India, your lineage was related to who your father was, not who your mother was, right? So there's a, annoying patriarchy element to all of that, I get it. But what's interesting here is to say that mother is all-encompassing. Mother is shared. Mother is something that everyone has in common. And then what's unique here is the lineage of the father, in this context, the lineage of the bodhisattva. So same wisdom, different method. Is it making sense? So it's saying Bhagavati, the mother of the perfection of Wisdom Sutra. Mother in this context means wisdom. Yep, everybody practices the wisdom realizing emptiness. Even if the different tenet schools approach it differently, it doesn't matter if they're foundational vehicle or great vehicle, doesn't matter, Pali tradition, Sanskrit tradition, everybody focuses on wisdom, and that wisdom cuts the root of samsara. That's shared, that's common. In this case, then the lineage is the method side, the father side, and it's the bodhisattva path. Does that make sense? So then when you see something like Arya Tara, Mother Tara, right? Tara, the green Buddha, who's in a feminine aspect, she's called Mother Tara, not because she's sweet and gentle and kind and suckles you at her breast and soothes your furrowed brow, but because she represents Dharmakaya, mind of all the Buddhas, in complete expansive all-pervasiveness, right? So Mother isn't always archetypal human friendliness, mother stuff. It often is associated with wisdom, with Dharmakaya, with spaciousness and the expanse. In the higher tantras, often there's iconography or words related to the womb that things are born from, meaning the space that allows for things to be born from, meaning the wisdom realizing emptiness, etc., etc. You see the relationship? So mother, wisdom, father, method. Okay. So then Prajnaparamita just means perfection of wisdom. And then I think Hridaya is just the particle, and then Sutra, we discussed how there are sutras that are spoken by the Buddha, sutras that are permitted by the Buddha, etc. And this is an example of all of the kinds of sutra, because the Buddha observes, he permits, he speaks, he does all the things. So that's the Sanskrit. So, okay, thus did I hear at one time the Bhagawan. So coming back to this Bhagawan, Bhagavati word, in Tibetan it's Chomdende or Chomdende Ma. And Chomdende, does mean endowed transcendent destroyer, but it also, what that really means is we're talking about a being who has all the qualities and who has destroyed all of the suffering and negative states of mind. So in a lot of sutras, you'll hear this title, this title, this title, this title, the Buddha. And you're like, okay, we're talking about the Buddha. Why are we giving him all these extra names? Why are we framing him in all these different ways? And it's a way of both respecting the path, but also inspiring the mind that a Buddha isn't just kindness and wisdom. The Buddha has all of these aspects, one of which is he's destroyed every foe. He's a foe destroyer. He's an arhat, right? He's a Bhagawan, meaning he's destroying negative states of mind and suffering, as well as their seeds and imprints. That's profound and epic. Let's take a moment for that, right? He's endowed with transcendent qualities, right? He doesn't only have loving kindness and compassion and the mind of enlightenment. He has every quality there could ever be. And so let's take a moment for that. Yeah, so in these sutras, it's kind of like a series of celebrations. Like, look at all these amazing things that a Buddha encompasses, because that will be you. Does that make sense? So Bhagawan, in Tibetan, Chamden De, in English, endowed, transcendent, destroyer. The meaning is having fully realized all qualities, having fully overcome all negative faults and their seeds and imprints. Massive vultures mountain, we've talked about a little bit, but the mountain looks like a mass of vultures. It looks like a vulture, apparently. I mean, from a distance, it didn't really look like a vulture to me, but it's, a vulture-esque sort of shape. That's one meaning. The other meaning is that some bodhisattvas take the form of vultures, and they were surrounding the mountain listening, because obviously there's not tons of space up there. So two different meanings of massive vultures mountain. Either it looks like a vulture, and that's just its identifying feature, or because that some bodhisattvas take the aspect of birds that are vultures, and they were surrounding the area during this time. Okay, Rajagriya, Okay. So that's some of the funny words. Then we've got also at that time, right, the second section down, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva. Okay, so Bodhisattva, Can you reassure me that you know what a Bodhisattva is? Can someone tell me? Doesn't have to be precise or perfect, but what's a Bodhisattva?
Someone who took upon himself to go in the bodhicitta way, right?
Yes, meaning what? 100%. What does that mean?
I think to have the right motivation of being of help to every sentient beings from the perspectives of wisdom and compassion, I think.
Yeah, good. Yeah, good. Good. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Bodhicitta is the main Mahayana motivation, the mind with two aspirations, the intention to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. Someone who has that is a bodhisattva. Okay? So just as you said, perfect, beautiful, but just so we don't lose it. In Tibetan, it's Janchub Sempa. So Janchub Sempa basically is like enlightened hero. It's like a hero with enlightenment. And, basically it's talking about how their orientation is towards enlightenment, but their being, their personhood, their hero, because they have great compassion, special intention, wanting to enact the welfare of all sentient beings without exception, taking responsibility for that. So it's not just that they wish everyone well passively, they wish everyone well actively. Yeah, so that's the extra kind of connotation in the Tibetan Janchub Sempa. So enlightened hero or enlightening hero. Then we have Mahasattva, which just means great being. And great being in this context is related to how Avalokiteshvara is showing the aspect of being a 10th level bodhisattva, right? So almost path of no more learning. He's like so close to showing the aspect of a fully enlightened Buddha, but here he's showing the aspect of being a bodhisattva, but the highest possible kind of bodhisattva. So Mahasattva, great being, 10th level bodhisattva. Does that make sense? And then Arya, he has the wisdom realizing emptiness. Avalokiteshvara, just the Sanskrit word for Chenrezig, which is the Tibetan word for the compassion Buddha.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
What do you mean? Can you explain by when you say taking the aspect off? You keep repeating it. So can you explain this saying?
Yeah, it's a good thing to clarify. We use it a lot, usually in the context of the guru. The guru is taking the aspect of being angry. He's not angry. Or the guru is taking the aspect of being hungry in order to be relatable because we're hungry, but actually he's fine. Taking the aspect of, it's like, for lack of a better word, pretending to be. You know, he's pretending to be a 10th level bodhisattva in this context. But Avalokiteshvara is actually a fully complete Buddha, even back in this time. But for the sake of the dynamic and for the sake of the display happening there on Vulture's Peak, there needed to be multiple levels of beings showing different aspects so that everyone would learn in the right way. So Chenrezig could be a teacher in his own right if he wanted to be, but he was showing the aspect of being the junior teacher, and Shakyamuni Buddha being the senior teacher. Yeah, so despite being a Buddha, he was pretending to be a bodhisattva for this context, for that purpose. Does that make sense? But I mean, to say pretending makes it sound like lying or manipulating, when it's more like he's bringing forward that characteristic. You know, he could bring forward the characteristic of, I don't know, Manjushri cutting through ignorance with a sword, or bring through the aspect of Tara leaping to the aid of sentient beings. So to say showing the aspect, you know, it's not as coarse as to say he's pretending. It's more that he's pulling forward and emphasizing a particular characteristic in order to teach people in a certain way. Does that kind of clarify it? Showing the aspect of. And it's something that we get very used to saying when we're talking about our tantric teachers, because we're trying to see our tantric teacher as one in nature with Vajradhara, the Buddha's aspect in his highest yoga tantra form. And so, you know, Lama Zopa Rinpoche shows the aspect of having diabetes, right? Lama Zopa Rinpoche shows the aspect of being non-linear in his teaching style. You know, he is showing that aspect. That is something that we see. We're not pretending that we don't see those things. And at the same time, we're trying to hold the idea that he's bringing forth those characteristics in order to teach us something, and that it's related somehow to the karma of our mind. Either it's obscurations or it's openings for learning. You know, it's complex.
I think it's a good way to, it's not the exact meaning of the showing the aspect, but it can help us in understanding what does it mean not to have an inherent existence. It's not all kind of signs of sides that I have to present. It's not parts of me. It's a non-inherent existence of myself. I can be this and this and this figure. It's a kind of emanation of various possibilities, which emphasize the concept of non-inherent existence.
Yeah, I agree. It is like that. And it's, you know, it's also like when you look at the different forms of Buddhas, that sometimes they're peaceful, sometimes they're passionate, sometimes they're wrathful, sometimes they're this, and that is to tame the afflictions of sentient beings. They don't actually have those negative states of mind. But, you know, if someone is being incredibly violent and aggressive and disruptive, you might need to manifest or show the aspect of power and wrath in order to intimidate their affliction. but so filled with love that you're not suppressing or dominating the person. You know, it's that delicate line of I'm subduing what is negative while holding them with such, you know, such kindness, such acceptance, such love. But occasionally people need a roar, and sometimes people need a cuddle, and sometimes people need a smile, and it can all be coming from the same compassion. But to think that always speaking exactly the same way to every single person is some sort of perfected equanimity is a misunderstanding and is oversimplifying the teachings on equanimity. Your mentality is even and same, goodwill, unbiased towards all, but the people that you have more rapport with, you talk more openly and directly with. The people you don't know as well, you use a slightly different aspect, but you can love them all the same, you know? So showing the aspect of is something even for ordinary people to kind of play with. Of, in this context, I show the aspect of, you know, I was thinking that when I got gas the other day at the gas station, and there was all these young Arab boys, and they were bewildered by the look of me. And I thought, I have to show the aspect of being just another young person, you know, and then they will not be scared. And so I tried to be smiley and jokey and young with them, and then they all relaxed. And of course I am a young person, but normally I don't think I need to like get into that, you know, but for their sake, that is what I brought forward. You know what I mean? We do this all the time, don't we? Jump all the way to the very last paragraph. Yeah, the Bhagawan having thus spoken. Oh, sorry, yeah, Sigalit. Oh.
Something about Shariputra?
Shariputra, yes. Shariputra was a senior student, showing the aspect of being a senior student. He apparently had already realized emptiness, but still was presenting the aspect of being a student, not a teacher. So he in his own right, of course, could have taught as well. But during the time of the Buddha, he wasn't enlightened yet. I think he got enlightened later down the track, or maybe, I forget the story, I'd have to look it up. He might have become enlightened like 20 or 30 years after he met the Buddha, but he wasn't initially when they met. So Shariputra was showing the aspect of being the senior student, modeling, you're allowed to ask. Modeling, if you don't know something, ask. Yeah, so that whole triad of the three of them, Buddha Shakyamuni, Avalokiteshvara, and Shariputra, you know, it was blessed by the Buddha. Now is the time that we can show this debate and people will have the ears to hear it and practice it. You know, so now let's do it. Okay, so the very last bit, the Bhagawan having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, Bodhisattva Mahasattva, it goes all the way to gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas. So you know about gods and you know about humans. Asuras is related to demigods. And Gandharvas are heavenly realm beings who have incredible merit. Sometimes they're called yakshas. And probably if you have ever looked at, I don't know, Gaelic culture, you know, Irish culture, it's a bit like fairies. They live in trees. Sometimes they're one with the scent of flowers. Yeah, anyway, Gandharvas are kind of like wood sprites. Yeah, in some contexts. They can be practitioners, or they could be mischievous and troublemakers. So it's said that sometimes if you're retreating by yourself in the woods under a tree, Gandharvas will sometimes help you and sometimes distract you, depending on your karmic relationship with them and their disposition. But Gandharvas are technically heavenly realm beings, so they do have certain qualities that we don't have. Anyway, Gandharvas, who knew? Okay. Gandharvas are, they're attracted to people that are practicing. They're attracted to places where there is practice. And so sometimes navigating things that have been on an altar, like food that you've offered on an altar or flowers that you've offered on an altar, there might be Gandharvas around. And so you want to make sure that not just for the sake of your practice and your path and your relationship with the Buddha, but also for the sake of these beings that might be around, that you don't treat things that are offerings too casually, you know, that you don't throw them away with some sort of dismissiveness. You know, if you had a flower on the altar and now it's time for it to go, that you put it outside somewhere that no one is going to step on it, for example. Stuff like that. So Gandhavas, fun fact. Asuras are demigods. Okay, so point being here is that lots and lots of beings, lots of realms were all taught simultaneously, and they all understood, even if they didn't speak the same language, they all understood because of the power of the Buddha and their own karma ripening in this positive way. The well said part above it is basically the Buddha giving permission to Avalokiteshvara to teach. He's saying, what you said is right, proceed. What you said is right, keep teaching it. Everybody else, keep practicing it. But it's kind of like the stamp of validation that you said it correctly, do that. So we're jumping around a bit. I think, you know, if you go back to how Shinini, son of the lineage train, over on the other page, we get down to form is empty, emptiness is form, that we already talked about a bit. And instead of reviewing that, I don't want anyone to get lost because it's a really important section. Instead of me reviewing it, I made a little poll for you guys to play with online. And it's completely anonymous. So basically it's like a quiz, but no one will know who answered what. But please do answer just to check in with your own knowledge, and then I'll help clarify afterwards. Of the 3 levels of dependency, which is the most coarse or gross? Is dependent on causes and conditions, dependent on parts and context, dependent on basis of designation. So you just choose which of those you think is the coarsest one, and no one's going to know if you're right or wrong, so please do what you think is true.
Yönten and gross or
Coarse?
what is it's the deepest one or the
opposite to deepest.
Okay.
So then the second question is, of the 3 levels of dependency, which is the only one related to impermanent phenomena only? Yeah, so causes and conditions, parts, or basis of designation. Which one is the one that refers only to impermanent phenomena? Meaning that the other ones also refer to permanent things as well. And just guess, it's okay. Slowly, slowly. And then 3, of the 3 levels of dependency, which one is the subtlest or deepest? Yeah. Dependent on causes and conditions, parts, or basis of designation. Number 4 is, what is the self? Is the self the main mind or mental primary consciousness? Is the self that which exists nominally, merely labeled on the valid basis? Is the self the inherently existent self? Is the self emptiness? Is the self the body and mind, the 5 aggregates? Okay, so then 5, what is the object to be negated? From the Prasangika Madhyamaka view, the most subtle one, it's also called the object of negation. So what is the object to be negated or the object of negation? Is it the 5 aggregates? Is it the self merely labeled on the valid basis? Is it the inherently existent self? Is it the negative states of mind that temporarily obscure its clarity? What is the object to be negated? Oh, or is it suffering? I put suffering there too, just for fun. Okay, 6. In the Heart Sutra, what line is indicating explicitly and directly how to practice the profound perfection of wisdom? Is it the correctly and repeatedly beholding those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature? Is it the form is empty, emptiness is form? Is it the completely past beyond error? Is it the mantra? Or is it the bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in? So what's the one indicating how to practice the profound perfection of wisdom? Number 6. And remember, I can't see who is answering what, so you might as well answer.
Yönten, can there be more than one answer?
No.
No.
Pick the best answer.
Okay.
There's an argument for others also being the answer, but pick the best answer or the most direct answer. Hence the word explicitly and directly.
Okay.
Number 7, in the Heart Sutra, which line is referring directly and specifically to the 4 Noble Truths? Yeah, no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance. Is it similarly no suffering? Is it all phenomena are emptiness? Is it form is empty? And in the famous phrase, form is empty, emptiness is form, which part is indicating ultimate truth? And in the famous phrase, form is empty, emptiness is form, which part is indicating conventional truth?
Are we good students? Do you see the results?
You're good people.
Oh, such a disappointment.
Boy.
You're very good people, which is more important. So of the form is empty, emptiness is form section, there's tons of stuff in your readings on it, and it's not something that I'm going to read in class, but it is, the highlights of it are in that reflection I sent you, in the form is empty, emptiness is form reflection from, I don't know, a week ago or something. So I took the highlights of those readings and read them into that reflection. If you'd prefer to read it yourself, it's all in there. Everything from that meditation is in your course materials, and then some. So it's all there. And we'll continue Heart Sutra-ing on Wednesday. Dedicate. Tai ga tai ga te ga te para ga te para sam ga te bodhisoha. Tai ta ga te para ga te para sam ga te bodhisoha. Ayata gate paragate parasamgate bodhisoha. See you later.